Hello, Rebecca.
Hi, good morning, Marion.
I am super excited for this conversation. So, I think it was last week, you and I were both tagged on a LinkedIn post that was referencing the Business Insider article about how Gen Z faces more pressure at work than previous generations. And of course, that set off a variety of comments around, you know, the work ethic of Gen Z. And we were specifically asked about what we thought about this in terms of nurses, nursing students, and the issues that are happening right now with retention of new nurses. So I thought this would be a great opportunity to discuss on this podcast.
And I love it, Larry. And because the truth is like both you and I sort of sit in between these generational dynasties, as you would say, like the largest generation ever that we've had the pleasure of forging the way through the nursing workforce as we know it, and the next generation who we feel like we both taught. You're teaching them actively right now. I spent 7 years in a community college working with that population, but a lot of them reaching out to us to derive where they're going and just what we're seeing within that workforce. And to your point, I don't know, do you remember when we were growing up? I don't know if this was in your household, but I feel like my grandparents and my parents would always say to me, you have it so much easier than we ever had it as kids. We had to walk uphill both ways to schools with no shoes in blizzards, right? Like you remember these kinds of stories. And I don't know about you, but I was having this conversation with a couple of my girlfriends recently. And I said, I actually think this generation behind us has had it a lot harder than we ever did. And I think we should talk a little bit about that and then, go into this. But what's your thoughts on that?
I could not agree more. So let's set the stage here. I am coming at this as both an educator, right? Higher education, teaching at my institution. I am a parent of a student who is about to go into college, so Gen Z student. But I was also a student, just recently. So I'm coming at this from all of those lenses, which I think makes me a little more empathetic than maybe some of the other folks who are coming at this with a lens of Gen Z is lazy or doesn't want to work. And I totally am with you in that I think they have it much, much harder than we ever did. And they don't get any sort of credit or empathy for what they have had to go through living through the pandemic. I know we all did, but I think it was more transformational for them, and what they are going to have to go through in the world that we've all created.
Yeah. And I think, there's, and to that point, I'm just expanding on it, not only the pandemic, but they grew up in the era when social media was it. So their entire relative things of safe spaces was 24/7 on a different kind of platform. They also grew up in an era where school shootings became the norm for them, that constant psychological battle of safety of growing up. Like, I don't remember that level of feeling unsafe when I was a kid. You came home at the end of the day, if you shut your door, there was no way for people to reach you unless they were brave enough to call your phone call and potentially continue to harass you, right? But I left school right before the first major shooting. Well, actually, maybe not. But these were things that I think they're psychological ones. So they were constantly connected. But also, they also kept getting this feeling. We did grow up, this generation did grow up with sort of this sense that, hey, you know what, children are valuable. So they're getting awards at times. So there's this feeling that this generation feels very privileged or sort of put on a pedestal in a way that perhaps past generations did not feel was done for them. But I'm looking at this workforce, and I just came out of, a large corporate role where I was responsible for employing a lot of Gen Z nurses in a direction of settings. And what I found fascinating was their agile ability to learn new technology, their ability to quickly engage and do things that would cause our generation heartburn and heart palpitations to have to master. But they took it in stride. But the reality is that I'm not sure we value their ease. I think we give them a lot less credit for their ease of use of technology in a way that we take it for granted, that by their association with growing up in that generation, that by their work ethic is somehow less than prior generations with regards to it. So I think it's an interesting topic that we're discussing today, Marion.
Yeah, I mean, I think I am so excited for this generation and the way that they are now causing all of us to have these conversations about work life balance, about retention, the whole thing with quiet quitting and act your wage that was referenced in that article. Like, if you want your employees, you want your nurses, you want Gen Z to work hard and do the things that we need them to do, then the environment where they're doing these things needs to be responsive and receptive and change to the needs of this generation. And I am there for it. I mean, I've been saying this for years now, that our healthcare system needs to change in all ways. Like, everyone everyone knows this, and yet nothing ever changes. Like, we spend the most amount of money on healthcare. We have the worst outcomes compared to other developed countries in a plethora of health related issues. Now we have nurses and physicians who are so burnt out and leaving the profession. Like, if this generation makes the healthcare system change, I am there to help.
100%. And honestly, the one thing that I feel very positive about is this generation is not accepting what our past generations have accepted as nurses. And the truth is, and I think we should talk about that just in a moment, because let's be honest, the generation that is still in nursing largely came about at a time when women had little opportunity, right? Most women could choose to be a secretary, they could choose to be a teacher, or they could choose to be a nurse, right? Because our average age of a nurse in this country is right around 47. So 50% of that population is over the age of 50, right? There wasn't a lot of other opportunities for women in that space. This next generation, the Gen Z generation, started to grow up in this generation where women had other options. And why we're talking women is still 95% of the population of nursing is still primarily female. We're still getting a lot more men in. But the reality is that there is more competition. And in a way that women had no other choices but to walk into environments in healthcare that were designed not well for them, that basically capitated their payment model and structure. The reality is that these areas failed. Those things that this generation is not willing to accept means that this generation can walk away from a profession that does not meet their expectations in a way that past generations would never have been able to do so.
Yeah, totally agree. There's so many more options now, which again is why I think nursing and healthcare systems in general need to be listening to this and adapting and changing. To your point, there's not like Gen Z has more options. And so with that comes the availability of so much more freedom to push for work-life balance and to be able to say, you know what? This is not what I wanted. It's not what I expected. And I'm going to go someplace else. And I don't think that's wrong to want to be happy in the profession you're in.
And we should talk about some of the statistics, Marion. I think that perhaps just around the nursing workforce for people to get an idea. Currently, based on research out of your own organization, we graduate 185,000 nursing students a year, the largest graduating class of any profession in the entire country. There are more nurses today than there are police officers, teachers, anything, and more nurses that graduate from any degree program in the country than multitudes of any other degree. But what we see is that even prior to the pandemic, 57% of new grads left the bedside within 2 years of practice, the largest exodus that nobody was willing to talk about. And I think what we're seeing, especially through the rise of social media, giving access to younger nurses who are very savvy, is we're actually hearing their side of the conversation in ways that we've never seen before. And I think that's highly unnerving to the current structures that exist in healthcare to reach audiences differently.
But, and to that point, we should be listening to them. Like, we are so lucky to have these platforms and an insight to gather empathy around what nurses are going through right now, and especially Gen Z nurses. And obviously it's all nurses or a lot of nurses. But these social media platforms give us that opportunity to really understand in a way that I don't think we've ever been able to to do before. And to your point, right, 2/3 of nurses say that they plan to leave the bedside in the next 3 years. And that study was from 2022 and it's 2024. So we're talking like next year, right? More than half say that they're burned out. 34% would not recommend the profession to someone. Like, these are staggering statistics that is going to lead to a healthcare crisis in terms of patient care that I don't think the public understands. And it's not just nurses also, it's up there for physicians as well. And I mean, again, I think if the pushback from Gen Z is any indicator, we really need to figure this out.
But let's talk about that. What is the problem with the work-life balance of the generations? I just left one of the largest healthcare conferences in the United States, and I had a lot of health system administrators come up to me that, don't deal with nursing on a day-to-day, but it's become a forefront for their issue to say something's wrong with nursing, right? So they started to do task studies on their floor, and they're like, nurses just have a lot of tasks. And I was like, it's not just tasks that are burning nursing out. So I think I said, have you looked at the schedules of your new nursing graduates? And they're like, no, what do you mean by schedules? And I said, are you aware that probably 100% of your workforce under 2 years of experience is working a day, night, holiday, weekend rotation? 2 weekends of every month is being assigned to this. They also have to work what they have is called a fake day off, which means that they might be sleeping one day, but back on that entire next night shift. So these things, this constant chaos that makes their life. I said, but more importantly, are you aware that nurses are the only they're paid hourly as opposed to in a budget. And what that means is if they walk on a shift and there's a low census, their manager is going to say, hey, you know what? We don't need you here today. But if you want to get paid for today, you actually have to take that time out of your vacation time.
Now, I just learned that and it blew my mind.
You just learned that? I mean, it's terrible.
I haven't worked clinically in a very long time, but yeah.
But imagine you have bills to pay, right? And they're like, hey, really sorry, but you know what? If you want to be able to make your mortgage payment at the end of this month or your rent payment at the end of this month, you have to take your vacation time, and you only have 2 weeks of vacation time, but you can't take vacation, but your vacation is to go home today because we can't afford to keep you on this floor. Like the dichotomy of the incredible pressure and chaos that they have nurses living under it's a wonder. I don't know if you know this, but the vast majority of nurses flip to part-time or per diem within 2 years of practice because the schedules that we force upon our new graduates are so chaotic and out of control that these nurses can't sustain themselves. And I think it is something fundamentally we're not talking about, but let's dive in there, Marion.
No, I mean, I totally agree. I remember vividly hating every single solitary second of my first year as a nurse because of exactly everything you said. The schedule, I had no control over it. I was sleeping, I was awake. I had a relatively young kid that I could hardly see because when I was home, I was asleep, but then I had to go to work. I remember I cried like every night and I hated it so much.
You were exactly right. And I felt the same way. And I remember the day that I finally thought I would have off, starting at 5 a.m. in the morning, my cell phone would be going off saying, hey, can you pick up today's shift? Just the day before when they had called me off and maybe take vacation time so that I would do these things. There was absolutely no value or respect that there was a life of a person behind being a nurse. We were simply treated in a way that the only thing that mattered was if we were present on that floor and if we were willing to sacrifice everything in our lives to be a nurse before anything else, no matter how chaotic it destroyed the other avenues within our own lives.
And I want to just stop here and say, we love being nurses, right? We love this profession. I have such respect for the clinical nurses who work at the bedside every day. Like, I've never met such smart, dedicated individuals in my life. And I don't want this to come off like we don't understand what goes into having to work in health systems at the bedside to keep people healthy and safe and thriving. And I just want to make sure that is clear. It's
Oh, I think it's perfectly clear.
the system that makes doing the job of a nurse so much more difficult than it needs to be. And again, I haven't worked clinically in a really long time, and I understand that. And there are things that I don't know or remember or have to deal with. But you and I both talk to so many bedside nurses every day, hearing their stories. And those are the things that motivate us to speak up, speak out, and have these types of conversations to make sure people are aware of what nurses are going through every day.
Exactly, Marion. And I think that's why we're addressing this, right? Because there is this perception, and then there's a reality, and somehow you and I are in this place where we can actually sort of shine a light into clarifying this issue. Because to your point, I think we fight to identify as nurses every single day because we recognize that voice is absent. And we recognize that a lot of people who have made it into larger positions of leadership stop identifying in nursing because professionally it doesn't work well for them. And we're trying to change and say, no, actually, being a nurse does work well for us to stay professionally. But the truth is that as those nurses who have those positions, we need to start speaking to the realities and the truth at the bedside, because the narrative, the national narrative, and the status quo that's been established around nursing is wrong, and we have to fix it. So I love what you said there, because you and I have not been clinically by the bedside for some periods of time, but we receive messages from the front line every single day about the realities of it. And they're begging us to try to help change a system for a profession they love, but a system that is failing them.
Yep. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And back to the article, right? Like, this is why Gen Z feels like they have to quietly quit or they're pushing back on boundaries because of the schedules that don't work for them, that make them potentially feel undervalued with no voice. And
Yes.
it's really hard nursing is really hard in general, especially working clinically. You're dealing with people's lives, and it's stressful and it's hard. And, um, I think we need to start trying to figure out ways to make it less hard from a systems perspective.
Because the truth is and you can, for the audience that may be non-nurses, the one thing that I always say to try to make it relatable is that if you're a new grad, you're young, you're in a new job, you make a mistake, yeah, you might lose your job. But in nursing, you might lose a patient's life. That level of responsibility, when you're feeling like your life is out of control, you're hardly awake and you can hardly sleep when you are awake, when supposed to be. The reality is that the odds and the stakes are so much greater for these new grads, because not only do you cause somebody their life, you could lose your job, your livelihood. And I know this is another conversation for another day, but we've now actually seen criminal prosecution of nurses for the mistakes they're making in environments that are largely failing them. And that's not happening to any other profession. We're not criminally prosecuting physicians or police officers for mistakes that happen on the job, unintentional mistakes that are happening on the job. But that's what's been rising in nursing. So the level of responsibility on this generation who's holding the entire healthcare system together is one that's very, very different. And I think if we're going to get back to it, Marion, the truth is schedules don't work. But I actually think that there has been a huge host of promise. And people have asked me a lot, like, Rebecca, why did you ever join a staffing company? Why did you do that? Right? Like, because we know the reputations of staffing companies. And so let me just put it out there. The reason I joined a staffing company was because I saw hundreds of millions of dollars being invested for the first time ever into technology that was designed to make the work of nurses better, the schedule of nurses better. And today, I have to tell you, it was the only place that I saw hundreds of millions of dollars develop technology that actually could change the schedules of nursing. And the truth is, hospital systems, they don't want to rely on staffing. They should be going out and utilizing this technology that enables nurses to work differently, as opposed to the archaic models that we forced on this workforce for generations because of a paper process.
Oh, this opens up other topics I'd love to discuss at some point, including there are so many nurse-led innovations that are trying to solve these problems, but can't get into hospitals to implement and sell their products that could potentially do exactly what you said, like make better staffing, better shifts and calendars that are responsive to the nurses at the bedside. And that another topic for another day. How do we get health systems to work with nurse-led startups and other healthcare provider startups to get their innovations into hospitals that could address a lot of the issues that we're talking about today?
That's exactly it. And I think, and it ties into the other topic, was as long as nurses are cost to healthcare systems do not have the money to invest in the nursing workforce. So the only place that I saw that happening was in private equity groups going into staffing and backing tech. And thank God it actually did happen, because now the tech exists. We know that there's better ways that nurses can have work-life balance. When you give nurses technology to pick up shifts when and where they want, suddenly they pick up more shifts. And they're not stuck into this archaic way of like 2 weekends a month plus day night weekend rotations and every holiday for the first 2 years of their life post graduation with an increase of salary of only 1.6%. Suddenly, they can actually pick up more shifts in a way that works for them without burning out the entire healthcare workforce. So, Marion, when we're looking at that article, I think what we're hoping to see is, yes, there's a change in conversation and power structure where we think technology can replace a lot of the individual. But what we're actually finding is that without humans, we can't move technology forward at all. And this next generation is starting to behave in a way that are putting up boundaries around their lives and access via technology. In fact, I was talking to a Gen Z nurse the other day who told me that they actually have blocked their boss from their cell phone, blocked their number, and said, you can reach me via the Slack channel we have set up or via email. But no longer are you going to reach me on my nights and weekends. And you can only reach me through work channels. I was floored. I was blown away to hear that they had done that. Like, I would never have thought to think that I should block a boss of mine from being able to have my cell phone. But what are you thinking on some of these things that you're hearing?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly, I totally agree. We have to set up more boundaries for work-life balance. Look, I am I used to be a 24/7, 365-day worker. I am an academic. We like that article or some comments said, like, I think our generation, we wear that as a badge of honor, the amount of work that we do and take on. And again, my kid is leaps and bounds smarter than I ever will be, and constantly is questioning why I'm doing these things. Like, if it's not making you happy or you're feeling stressed out, burnt out, and overwhelmed, stop doing it. And it seems so simple, right? Like, just stop doing it. But to their generation, it is that simple, right? Like, if you're not happy or it's stressing you out or causing you mental health issues, like, just stop doing it. And again, I think back to what we've been talking about, that's Gen Z's, view on these types of things. And of course, it's not all Gen Z, and we're painting this broad picture. But I think we really need to take some advice from them in terms of the work-life balance. And I really have been trying to take that to heart. I mean, we had this conversation in episode 1. So I think, yeah, I'm there for it. We should not expect people to be working and at our beck and call 24/7. That's not, that's not okay. Go back to the union chant 888.
That's exactly it. No, Marion, and I think this is why we had this conversation. As we possibly have a lot to learn from this generation. And a lot of us, our generation, we're really burned out ourselves, right? Trying to manage a family, aging parents, having a career, and everything that we're trying to accomplish for the world. The next generation is finally starting to say, we've watched our parents go through this. We went and we experienced economic downturn where our parents lost their jobs and we hadn't seen them forever. And, I think about my own kids who look at me and say, Mom, you're constantly on your phone. And I'm thinking to myself, Nothing is that important. So bravo to Gen Z. Bravo for making them have this conversation. And the truth is to the generation that even came before us. You're not, many of them are not burdened by the college debt that these generations having. You grew up in a childhood time where there was your families and friends in your neighborhood, but not a world of pressure external to it. And when you graduated, these jobs that you entered, as the article says, ended at 5 o'clock and your weekends were
Mhm.
your time. It's time for us to reappreciate and reimagine what that means. And for us, this was an interesting topic. I don't think we have all the answers, but it was a great tag. So we want to thank everybody on LinkedIn for bringing us into this conversation.
Yeah, and to Gen Z, keep doing your thing, and hopefully, your pushing of existing systems will help make it better for you, but also for coming nurses and other healthcare providers, and ultimately for patients. Like, we want to get a healthcare system that is equitable and good for all patients. And I think, when you have a happy, mentally, a happy, healthy workforce, you have happy, healthy patients.
Absolutely. Well, Marion, this is so fun. Episode 3 of Love and Leary. Thanks for being with us. And we will see you guys back in the future for another topic of peeling back the layers of what's going on in and around nursing.